right. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining me. We'll go ahead and get started here. If you got your questions, go ahead and post them. Should be below the video if you were on a smaller screen, to the right of the video if you were on a larger screen. So it looks like we got a few questions in here to start. So we will start here with Ted says, when do you start to open your hips on the downswing? Should you open them as you bump to your lead side or after you reach the straight line position? Well, you're definitely going to be starting to open up your hips much before the straight line position. So I assume you're talking about like a straight line release. So the straight line release would be here. Your hips are going to be definitely opening way before that, right? So it's basically in the start of the downswing, right? So when you get up here, right, that your hips are going to start to open right away, right in the start of the downswing. Now, your body is going to be moving forward a little bit as you get up to the top. So generally, when you look at most tour players, if you draw a line on the outside of their hip, when they get up to the top of the swing, they'll have a little bit of a space between their hip and that line. So they're moving ever so slightly to their lead side as they get up to the top. And then when I start my downswing, I'm going to get into the ground, I'm going to push in the ground, and I'm going to start rotating my body right away to start the downswing. So that bump that you're talking about, that's happening as you're getting up to the top and then continuing in the start of the downswing. You're going to start the rotation of your hips in the very start of the downswing. So when I say the start of the downswing, that's when the club's switching directions. Some players will actually, the hips will actually start moving a little bit before. You have to be very flexible. That's not going to apply to 99.9% of the people, probably, most of us normal people, right? But if you look at like the really, really flexible people, like a Cameron Champ, something like that, you see it more so on the LPGA tour. Women are generally going to be more flexible, where you see the hips actually before the club switches directions. You'll actually start seeing the hips start to go. But the vast majority, the extremely vast majority of golfers, that's going to be starting in the very start of the downswing. All right, let's keep going. So Rufus A says, I have a really hard time with chipping pitching around the green when the lie is steeply uphill. I hit it really, really fat, but do not have this problem otherwise. What is correct for those green side shots? So when you have a very much uphill kind of shot, or when you have an extreme slope, the key to these shots is to go with the slope, right? So what that means is if you have an uphill lie, so let's think about it this way. If I have a level lie, right, this is how I'd be swinging with a level lie, right? I'm swinging the club fairly level with the ground as it's coming into the ball, right? So now if I have a uphill lie, I'm going to take that same thing and I'm going to tilt it upward to match the hill. So now I'm going to be swinging more like this. If I have a downhill lie, right, I'm going to tilt down and I'm going to be swinging more down with the slope, right? So if I had to guess, it's hard to say without seeing exactly what you're doing. But if I had to guess, you're probably just hitting into the slope too much. Swing with the slope. Now, what we have to keep in mind when we go with the slope, the ball flight's going to go with the slope, right? So if I have a downhill slope, my ball is going to come out lower because I'm hitting down and through the ball more, right? I'm swinging with the slope. If I have an uphill slope, my ball is going to go quite a bit higher than normal, right? Because I'm essentially adding loft because I'm swinging up with the slope, right? So the key to these shots is really just to swing. You're not doing anything different technique-wise. You just got to go with the slope. Don't fight the slope. Don't try to swing. Take your level slope swing and do it on a extreme slope because that's going to make it more difficult to control your ground contact. And I would imagine that sounds like what's going on there. So RD says, for the driver, what does the hand path look and feel like through the takeaway and into the release? So as far as what it feels like, unfortunately, there isn't a way for me to answer that question because feel is really relative. So I don't know what it's going to feel like for you, and vice versa. So I can't really tell you what it's going to feel like. But as far as what it's going to look like, a couple things I'd recommend doing. If you ever have questions like this, what I think what really helps, what helped me to understand kind of what's going on, YouTube. Go to YouTube, search your favorite handful of players, and look how they're moving their hands. Look at the path of their hands. Look from face on and look from down the line. See how the hands move. If that's what you want to see, if you're looking for what it looks like, that'd be a very good place to go. So basically, what I would look like from face on, what you're going to see is essentially your turn. It's coming from your lead shoulder, and you're going to turn your shoulder, and your lead arm's going to stay relatively straight. So that's essentially the hand path, right? My shoulders are going to turn, and my arms are going to go up. So my hand's going to be going around in a circle, and then when I start down, it's going to be doing the same thing, right? My shoulder's going to turn down, and my lead arm's going to stay relatively straight. I'm going to reach a low point with my hands around in this area. Then the hands are going to start to work up and around, right? That's what it is from face on. From down the line, and this is not really any different for a driver than it is for an iron. It's not, there aren't huge differences there. It's really about just where you're contacting the ball in the arc, right? When I say the arc, I'm talking about how this club head moves around in an arc, right? So you can see how it moves around in an arc. This is no matter what club you're swinging, it's going to move around in an arc. So with an iron, for a shot that I'm hitting off of the ground, I'm going to be contacting that ball in the downward part of that arc. For the driver, I'm generally going to be hitting that ball more in the upward part of the arc, right? Because the ball position is going to be more forward. If I can hit the ball more on the upper part of the arc, that's going to generally allow me to have a higher launch and lower spin, right? Which is going to help me to hit the ball farther. Now, from down the line, the hand path in the backswing can be a lot of different things. It can be inside. It can be a little bit more outside. It can be anything in between. The hand path in the backswing isn't really that important. What I would look for is how you're getting your hands to work down the downswing. So what I would look at is something called the elbow plane line. And this is a line that goes from the ball up through the middle of your elbow, right? That's where the elbow plane line goes. And it's only really going to be accurate if you have a good camera angle. So when you're looking at your swing on video, make sure that you have a good camera angle from down the line to be able to analyze this. So the way you set up your camera, you want to have it down the toe line. I find that a lot of people, and I know this because I do a lot of online lessons, people send videos that are from the ball line, right? So what they'll do is they'll have a ball on the ground like this, and then they'll set up the camera to be shooting right down that. So this is the ball line. And then it's too far to the right from the toe line, and it's not going to be the correct angle, right? So we need to make sure that it's down the toe line. Very easy way to do this is to take an alignment stick, place it on the ground, point it at a target out in the distance. Now take your camera and align up your camera with this alignment stick to where if there's a laser coming out of the camera, it's going to be shooting right down the alignment stick. And then when you go to set up to the ball, you're going to have your feet right up there close to it, the same distance away from it. You don't want to be set up like this or like this or like this. That's not going to work. You got to have it up there, I would say within an inch or two of the stick. That's going to give you the best, most accurate reading, on what you're looking at. All right. So we want to have it set up down the toe line. We want to have it at about hip level, right? So hip level is going to be right here, pocket level, about this height. We don't want it way up here. We don't want it on the ground. It needs to be at this level. Otherwise, it will not be accurate. And then you need to have the camera far away enough to where you and the club stay in the frame throughout the entire swing. So if your feet are cut off, if the club's going way out of the frame at the top of the swing, that sort of thing, you're too close. You got to move it back just a little bit. All right. So if you follow those three things with the camera angles, down the toe line, hip level, far away enough to where you and the club stay in the frame throughout the entire swing, you will have the correct camera angle. So now once we have the good camera angle, I'm going to draw a line from the ball, the middle of the ball, up through the middle of my elbow. What I want to see, as far as my hand path is concerned, what I want to see is as I'm starting my downswing, I want to see my hands working toward that elbow plane line. If my hands work away from that elbow plane line, then my hand pass going too far out to right, that's going to typically lead to an over the top kind of swing, right? If the hands work under it, that's pretty rare, but generally what I see is the hands don't really work toward it very much. So I want to see my hands working toward the elbow plane line. Depending on how upright your swing is, if you have a more of a flatter swing, you want to probably see your hands on the elbow plane line by lead arm parallel, right? So let's say your swing's kind of more like this, where we're going to want to see those hands on the elbow plane line by lead arm parallel. If you have a very upright swing like a Bubba Watson, right? Let's say you're way up here, you're going to have a hard time getting your hands on that elbow plane line, but they need to be working toward that elbow plane line, right? Now, by the time I get about halfway down, a little above my waist here, I want to see my hands on that elbow plane line, right? If my hands aren't on the elbow plane line by that point in the swing, then I'm going to tend to come down steep and over the top, right? So I want to see the hands on the elbow plane line, and as I come into the ball, my hands are going to be on that elbow plane line. But really what we want to see is those hands approaching the elbow plane line. If those hands stay above the elbow plane line, you're going to tend to come down steep. A drill that I would recommend doing if you are in that kind of situation would be this drill here. Love this drill. You take, this is the swing plate. If you're not familiar, move it. Here we go. So this is the swing plate. If you want to pick up a swing plate, you can grab one on our resources page. So if you go to the resources tab at the top, there's a list of all the things that we recommend. This is on there. You can pick one of them, click the link and pick one of them up there. Basically, it's just a heavy plate that holds an alignment stick, and then you put a pool noodle over it. All right. So many great drills you can do with this, but this is one of my favorite ones right here. So what you're going to do is you're going to take this plate, and you can also, if you practice at a place or you have the ability to be able to stick an alignment stick into the ground, then you don't really need one of these. I still like to use it in situations like that because it's just easier to move around if I need to. So what you do is you place this to where it's intersecting with the ground, or where it would intersect with the ground is about 6 inches on the outside of the ball and about 2 feet behind the ball. Right, so it'd be kind of like that. See, my ball is up here. So it's about 2 feet in front and then about 6 inches to the inside there. And then the angle that this is at is going to be about the lie angle of the club, right? So a 6 iron is roughly going to be about 60 degrees. And when I say lie angle, what I'm talking about is when I hold this club flush to the ground, that's the angle. That's this angle right here between the shaft and the ground, right? So you can see how it's set up about at that angle right there. So a 6 iron is going to be about 60 degrees. That's about standard. If you have a longer club, you go up to like a 4 iron, that's going to be a little bit flatter. It's going to be a little bit less than 60 degrees. When you go up, when you go down through the bag, you go to like an 8 iron, a 9 iron, it's going to be a little bit more upright, right? But generally about 60 degrees is where you want it. And the other thing I like about the swing plate is it has the degrees on there, so you can clearly see what it is. So now if I have if I'm not getting my hands onto that elbow plane line, this is going to tell me, right? I'm going to know right away if I'm getting those hands on the elbow plane line, because my hands are going to go out here. So I'm going to have to learn how to get my hands under where they need to be able to do this. So I really like this drill for that. If you're interested in a good drill to work on, so this would be a good drill that you can do with that. All right, let's keep going. Andra Rob Billard, I think it says. I say I do many of the drills, but I end up messing up my swing on the course. After doing exercises, how do I move back from a normal practice swing and swing on the course? How do I stop being technical and just focus on the shot? So you need to separate the practice tee from the playing tee. When you go play, focus on the ball. Focus on your ball flight and the ball. Focus on, because what you have to think, what does it take to hit a good golf shot, right? It takes ball first contact, center face contact, a square club face, and a neutral arc down to the ball, right? A fairly neutral arc down to the ball. If you do that, you're going to hit good golf shots, right? So when you're on the course, focus on that. Don't focus on the only time I would say is to focus on a technical thing is if it directly improves one of those aspects. If it's not improving any of those aspects, then don't worry about it. Go out and play and focus on your ball flight, and your contact. That's what I would recommend. That's going to allow you to play the best golf. Now, if you don't really care about that, right? Because what we have to understand is that when we make technical changes to the swing, right, you don't know how to hit the ball well yet and do those technical changes. So there's going to be some growing pains there, right? Do that on in your practice. When you go play, focus on making good contact and things like that, right? So, and then as you do it more in your practice, it will show up more without you even unconsciously having to do it. It will show up more on the course, right? So, but if you go on the course and you don't really care if you hit poor shots, then you can work on the technical things on the course, but I don't recommend that. I recommend keeping the practice tee and the playing tee separate. When you go play, focus on your ball flight and contact, and only think about technical things if they directly improve right away, instantly what you're working on. So an example might be, let's say you're chunking the ball, right? Well, a technical thing you can think of is, okay, I want to push off of my right leg and get into my lead side as I start the downswing, right? That might be a technical thing, and then all of a sudden that's going to help you to make better ball first contact, right? But so that instantly does that, right? So what I find a lot of people do, they're focusing on things that actually directly make them hit the ball worse, right? It's not that the things that they focus on is a bad thing. It's just that you don't know how to hit the ball well yet and do it that way, right? So think about it this way. Let's say this is an analogy that I like to use. Let's say you've learned how to type, right? You learn how to type, you type really well, right? You're typing really well. Now I'm going to take the keyboard and I'm going to flip it upside down. And I'm going to tell you now you have to type just as well, right? Well, you're not going to be able to do that, right? It's going to take a lot of time and practice to be able to do that, right? And let's say that for some reason typing upside down is the best way to do it, right? It doesn't mean that typing upside down is a bad thing. It just means that you don't know how to do it well, and you don't know how to type well and do it fast and all that at the same time. So that's kind of what it's like when you change something in your swing, right? When you change a technical thing in your swing. Let's do this for example. Let's say early extension, right? Early extension. A lot of people have early extension. A lot of people stand up out of your posture. You can hit fantastic golf shots coming up out of your posture. You absolutely can. Because the main reason, there's two main reasons why a lot of people come up out of their posture. One is to shallow out the club, right? If I'm like this and then I stand up and I really extend, see what happens to the club? The club shallows out. If I stay in my posture, I'm going to continue to come down steeply. That's not going to lead to good ball flight, right? It doesn't mean that staying in your posture is a bad thing. We want to stay in our posture, right? But if you're someone who's used to standing up out of your posture and now you start staying in your posture and you start hitting really bad shots, that doesn't mean that you should not try to stay in your posture. It means that you need to learn how to hit the ball well and stay in your posture. So we have to actually shallow out the club in different ways, in ways that you don't know how to do. You're not good at doing that, right? You've trained yourself how to hit the ball well to a certain extent, right? Coming out of your posture, right? Now you have to train yourself to hit the ball well while staying in your posture, right? And that's going to take repetition. You're not going to be able to translate that. I wish it worked out to where, you start doing something better in your swing and it automatically leads to better results. That's not always how it works, right? Because there's a lot of times when you change something in your swing, you have to change at least two things, right? A lot of times there's more than that because there's things that get off, right? There's things that, golf is a game of precision. If you hit the ground 2 inches behind the ball, 2 inches isn't that much distance, right? That's not that much space, but it makes a huge difference in the result of the shot. If I hit the ball 1 inch toward the toe, we're talking 1 inch, let's say half an inch toward the toe, That's going to be very, very different than a shot that I hit dead in the center of the face. So that's really what it comes down to. You have to get better. Whatever you're working on, you have to get better at doing it and do that on the practice tee. When you go play, focus on your ball flight and contact and only think about technical things that directly improve your ball flight and contact if there are issues with your ball flight and contact. Ideally, there would be no issues with your ball flight and contact, and you can just swing your swing and hit it, right? And then work on the technical things. And then as you get better and better at the technical things in your training, it will show up more without much conscious thought when you're out on the course. So Aaron says, in your earlier discussion about shipping uphill and downhill, please discuss how you determine the ball positions. So the ball position is really going to be dependent on the ball flight that you're going for, right? So if I'm trying to hit a low chip, right? If I'm trying to hit a low, like kind of skipping kind of chip, you've seen those chips that you see a lot of the tour players make where it comes out low, takes one hop and kind of stops, right? If I'm trying to hit that kind of chip, I may play the ball a little bit more back in my stance, right? More off my back foot. So off the inside of my back foot, because that's going to allow me to get my hands a little bit more in front and keep it low, right? If I'm trying to hit the ball a little bit higher, I may move it a little bit more forward in my stance and maybe even open up the face a little bit to add the loft to get it up. So the ball position is really going to be dependent on the ball flight, the trajectory that you're looking for. If you're looking for lower trajectory, it's going to be a little bit more back in the stance. If you're looking for higher trajectory, it's going to be a little bit more forward in the stance. So generally, my ball position does not really, it's not a huge change. So it's not like I want it way back my stance like that. It's more like if I'm hitting it low, it's going to be kind of off the inside of my right foot, right? If I'm hitting it high, a little bit higher, let's say I'm trying to hit more of like kind of like a flop shot, like super high, right? I'm going to play it, a little bit more in the middle of my stance, maybe just forward in the middle of my stance to get a little bit more release on the club. But that's not a huge difference, right? We're talking low is right there, and then higher. Well, if I'm hitting a flop shot, I'm going to go wider so I can get my hands lower. But you can see that's just forward of the middle of my stance, right? So the middle of my stance with this, we're talking like it's 2-3 ball difference in the ball position. So it's not really going to be like a huge difference there. But as far as uphill and downhill, I'm not going to play a different ball position. It's going to be if I want to hit it low, I'm going to put it a little bit more back in my stance. If I want to hit it higher, I'm going to put it a little bit more forward in my stance, right? So that's whether I'm uphill or downhill or whatever. All right, keep the questions coming. We got, let's see here, 35 minutes left here. I'll stay on here right up until noon. No problem, Aaron. Glad to help. So Aaron says, "Thank you. Do you use the same technique for pitching to a pin 100 yards away uphill?" Yes. Yeah. If you're hitting any uphill shot that you're or downhill or whatever, you go with the slope. You swing with the slope. So you don't try to swing against the slope. That's what's going to lead to poor ground contact and stuff like that. Andre said, "In the speed training, we use the driver. Do all the same techniques work for irons?" So here's the difference between kind of speed as far as so first of all, let me mention this. You don't need to do speed training for irons and driver. Just do the speed training with your driver, and the speed training that you're doing is going to translate some to the irons, right? Without you needing to do anything. So I've gone through the training, and I basically gained one club with my irons. I did no speed training with my irons. I only did it with my driver, but I gained about a club with my irons. Now, what we have to understand with driver versus irons is that when you're hitting your driver, you're the basically the goal is to get the ball to go as far as you can, right? That's the goal. There's no I need to hit my driver exactly this number. It's I'm trying to hit my driver as far down there as I can, so that way I can be as close to the hole as possible, right? For my approach shot. So that's what I'm trying to do. Now, if you're a big hitter and you are in situations where you're driving greens and certain things like that, okay, yeah, you might be trying to hit your driver on a number, but most of us in most situations are going to be hitting the driver, basically trying to hit the driver as far as we can, right? So with an iron, that's not the case. In iron, we are trying to hit an iron at a number, right? So let's say you hit your 7 iron 160 yards, right? You have 160 yards to the hole. If you hit your 7 iron 180 yards, that's not going to be good, right? If you're trying to hit at 160, the flag's at 160, and then you hit at 180, that's not going to be good. That's going to be way over the green. That's a problem, right? So you don't, what I would recommend doing is make the swing with your driver that allows you to control the distance as well as you can, right? You want to mesh as much power as you can with controlling the distance as much as you can, right? So that doesn't mean you're necessarily going to be lifting your heel off the ground. Now, if you lift your heel off the ground and make a big swing, big long swing with your irons, and you're able to control the distance really well, then yeah, do that. That's going to work just fine. But if you find that it's erratic, right? You sometimes you hit your 7 iron 180, sometimes you hit it 160, then I wouldn't recommend doing that. I would recommend, taking a swing that allows you to hit it on a number much more easily. All right. So that's really kind of what the difference is between the two. All right, keep the questions coming. So RC says, "How do I hit a low running drive?" Well, basically, you just move the ball position. Instead of hitting up on the ball, you're going to swing more level with the ball. So what I would do is I would put the ball a little bit back of the stand. So generally, you might play it off of the lead shoulder, right? So let's say that this alignment stick here would kind of be where the ball position would kind of be normally, right off of the lead shoulder. Well, if I'm trying to hit it lower, what I might do is I might play it a little bit more back, so that way I'm swinging more level with the ball, right? So my club is coming more level as I'm coming into contact instead of up. If I hit up on it more, it's going to be a higher launch, right? If I come in more level, it's going to be a lower launch. Also, what I would recommend doing is tee it lower, right? If you hit it higher on the face, it's going to launch higher. So we want to hit it probably like dead center in the face. That would be ideal. That's going to allow you to do that. So playing the ball a little bit more, just a little bit forward to the stance, so that way you're coming in more level with the ball. That's going to help you to, one, come in more level with the ball and launch it lower that way. It's also going to tend to help you to have a little bit more shaft lean as you're coming into contact, right? And then the other thing is we want to tee it a little bit lower, so that way we're hitting it kind of dead in the center of the face. That's going to allow you to have kind of a lower launching drive. That's going to be kind of that low running kind of drive. So that's kind of how I would do it. The other thing that I would recommend doing, if it's still not quite low enough, for what you'd like, what I'd recommend doing is hit more of a draw with your driver. The reason is that when you hit a draw, you have to close the face a little bit to get it to draw. And when you close the face a little bit, it's going to de-loft the face a little bit. And when you de-loft it, it's going to come out lower. All right. So just to summarize, hit that low running draw. We're going to tee it up just a little bit farther back in the sand so we can swing more level. We're going to tee it a little bit lower to make sure that we kind of get it more in the middle of the face. And we're going to try to hit more of a draw type swing. So I'm going to swing from the inside with a little bit more of a closed face, maybe taking a little bit of a stronger grip, with the lead hand a little bit more top, trail hand a little bit more under to get that face a little bit more closed to be able to create that draw that's going to help the ball go lower. So Joe Hart says, what do you recommend as far as golf balls in cold weather, like 40 degrees? Play the same golf balls. Don't worry about playing different golf balls in different temperatures and stuff like that. Just play the same golf balls all the time. So Ted says, I tend to stand up slightly in my takeaway. Would making an effort to drop lower than my address position on my downswing be a good swing thought to correct this? I mean, if you stand up a little bit in the takeaway, that's fine. What I tend to see when people stand up in the takeaway is because they're too bent over in the address position. So what you're likely doing is you're standing up to find balance, right? So imagine if I'm set up like this. I'm going to do an extreme example here. Imagine I'm set up like this, right? Well, it's going to be very, very difficult for me to make a takeaway without standing up, right? Because I feel like I'm going to fall on my face if I don't stand up a little bit. So what I'd recommend doing is standing a little bit taller in your address position. Most likely this is what you need to do. And that will help you to not stand up because you're already going to be in good balance. So here's a good way to kind of find the proper balance. So first and foremost, I want you to really relax your shoulders and relax your arms. I want you to feel like your arm is just hanging from your shoulder socket like a wet noodle, right? So get loose with it, shake it out, get that nice and loose, right? The next thing we're going to do is we're going to get a little bit of flex in the knees. It doesn't take a lot. We just need a little bit of flex in the knees. Generally, your kneecap is going to be right over the balls of your feet, right? What I want you to feel like is like you're in a really athletic kind of stance, right? So if I'm standing here like this with my legs locked out, I'm not going to be able to move very, very quickly or very athletically. On the other end of that, if I have a lot of flex in my knees, I'm not going to be in a super athletic and be able to move very quickly kind of position because I'm really heavy into my legs, right? If you watch a tennis player, right? You watch a tennis player about to, watch Djokovic, return a serve, right? He's doing like a split step. So he does that split step. He gets a little bit of flex in the knees, and then he's kind of moving in, and that's an athletic kind of movement. What he's not staying here with his legs dead straight, and he's not standing here way down like this. He does a split step with a little bit of flex in his knees, and then he can move around very quickly. You watch a shortstop in baseball, right? They're going to be kind of moving in. They're going to have a little flex in their knees. They're kind of moving in like this. They're moving around. So that way they can react very quickly. They don't have their legs dead straight or locked out. We don't want to do that in golf either. So it just takes a little bit of flex in the knees, right? So that's the next piece. And then what we're going to do is we're going to push our hips back and our chest forward until our arms are hanging, roughly, 5-6 inches in front of our legs. All right. And what I want you to do when you're doing this is pay attention to the pressure in your feet from heel to toe. I want that to stay very balanced. I don't want more pressure in the toes and more pressure in the knees, because I can be like this and then, push my hips way too far back, and now I'm way in my heels. I can also push my hips not back enough and my chest too far, and now I'm way out here on my toes. So I want you to feel very balanced in your balls of your feet, your toes, and your heels. So that's going to look something like this. Again, relax. I'm going to get my proper stance with here. I'm going to get a little flex in the knees. I'm going to push my hips back and my chest forward. Right. So I'm staying very balanced in my feet here. And now my hands are roughly about 5-6 inches in front. That's where I want to be, right there. So now from here, I don't feel like I need to stand up. I don't feel like I need to go way down. I can stay very balanced and make a nice takeaway. So that's what I'd recommend doing as an exercise. And what will most likely happen is you will find that you are just bending over too much to begin with, and you'll likely not stand up out of it. So the other thing that I want to mention there is what I find a lot of people try to do is they try to like keep their back dead straight. And when they do this, they actually end up kind of curving their spine and sticking their butt out like this. This is not how, because when you're like this, you're going to tend to stand up as well. If anything, I want you to feel a little bit of rounding. I want you to relax. If you were to really relax your spine, you're going to have rounding, right? And if you look at the best players, it's typically what you're going to see. You're going to see a little bit of rounding in the spine. Our spine is not going to be a dead straight thing. So if we try to kind of lock it in, we're going to have a hard time turning and moving very athletically. It's the same kind of thing that I was talking about before. If you're returning a serve in tennis, right? You're going to relax your spine, right? You're going to kind of have some rounding in your spine. If you're going for a ground ball, you're going to have some rounding in your spine. You're not going to have it dead straight because then you're going to move like this, right? So relax your spine so that way you can move more athletically and properly in the swing. All right, we got about 20 minutes left, excuse me. So Andre says, is it okay if the toe of the club is off the ground at address, or should it be flat? How to adjust this and set up? It is totally fine. Generally, it is going to be up off the ground a little bit, and it's at setup. It doesn't really matter. What matters the most is at impact. That's when it matters. So because you have the toe up at address, that doesn't mean that's how it's going to be at impact. In fact, I would venture to bet you're probably toe down at impact. Most people are. So yeah, focus on impact, not as much on the address. I wouldn't worry about being toe up. I wouldn't even worry about being toe down at address. It's really just about at impact. But generally, it is going to be a little bit more toe up, because if you let your arms kind of hang straight down, right, your hands are going to be a little bit lower than what they are going to be at impact. So Bill P says, when you demonstrate using the cardboard box for the over-the-top drill, how far back and away from the ball do you set up the box as a general rule? I don't actually have like exact numbers. I just know that, so what I would think about is, if I want this club to come from the inside, right? So meaning if I want to have an inside path, so let's say this is my target line, is where this stick is, right? If I want to make sure that I have an inside path. So imagine if I put the box right there, if that's where I put it, right? Well, I can very easily swing from inside this stick to outside that stick still, right? If I move it right here, right, I can still swing it from inside that stick very easily or from outside that stick to inside the stick. So really what I want to do is I want to put this in a place that forces me to swing from inside the stick to outside the stick. So now with it right there, right, it would be very difficult for me to come in and swing it from outside that stick to inside the stick, right? I have to swing this from inside the stick to outside the stick to avoid that box, right? Now, if I'm putting this here, this is what, 5 inches behind the ball and maybe an inch outside the ball, maybe an inch or two outside the ball, right? Now I could put this farther back and it would still work fine, right? It just needs to go behind the ball and a little bit to the right of your ball to force the path to come from the inside. You don't have to have like an exact 2 inches this way, 4 inches that way. It just needs to go behind the ball. What I want you to visualize, what I want you to understand is, what I would rather you do is I would rather you understand that where you need to put it. What I'd rather you understand what an inside path looks like, and then you can just put the box in a place where it would force you to create that path, right? That's what I would recommend that you do. So I can put this there, and that's going to force an inside path. If I put it too far back, right, well, now that's not really in the way of my swing, and I can still swing over the top, right? So that's too far back. So generally, somewhere behind the ball and a little bit to the right of the ball, right? That's going to allow. Now, if you start hitting balls and the ball is starting to the left of this stick and curving back, your ball flight's going to tell you as well, right? So if I hit a shot and I'm lining up my feet with this stick, right, and I hit a shot that starts to the left of that stick and slices back, well, odds are I'm probably swinging to the left, right? So I need to adjust where my box is. So what I'd say generally, 6 inches or so behind the ball, a little bit outside the ball to force the path to work from the inside. So David S says, Q, the other day you said we need to keep your lead shoulder tilted toward the ball so we can keep seeing the ball. How does that work with trying to keep some spinal tilt toward the trailing side? Maybe I'm just uncoordinated. So what we have to understand is that the spine, it's not just like a steel rod that doesn't move, right? The spine, if I keep my hips level, I can turn my spine that way to make my rib cage tilt down, right? I can also keep my hips up against this wall, right? So not turn my hips and then turn my rib cage, right? So now my rib cage is pointed that way. That's coming from your spine, right? So I can also go like this, right? That's my spine. I can round my spine, right? And then I can extend my spine. I can move my spine all around. So that's what we have to understand, is that's what's happening in the swing. So when we talk about the spine angle in the stable fluid spine section, really what we're talking about is the overall angle of your body, right? So if you look at the overall angle of my torso here, right, I'm tilted away. When I go up to the top of the swing, it's remaining tilting away, right? But let's think about what my spine did. My spine turned, right? Because my rib cage turned relative to my hips, right? What also happened is my spine went into some left side bend, right? Because if I didn't go into left side bend, then it would look like this, right? My shoulders would stay very level. So I have to have some left side bend to be able to stay in my posture, right? If I didn't do left side bend, I'd look like this. I need to have some left side bend so that way my shoulders stay tilted down, right? So that's what's happening in the backswing is that my spine is going to turn a little. It's going to do a little bit of that. It's also going to do a little bit of that, right? But if you look from face on, right, I'm going to be angled away. I'm going to remain angled away. But my spine did this and it did this. I put those together, right? And I put that with my turn. That's what I look like. Right. So that's what's happening with the spine. It's not a dead straight rod. I think if we get that visual out of the mind, that's not like a steel rod that doesn't twist or turn or curve or anything like that, then it's going to be, you're going to tend to be very, very stiff and not move properly. So what I want you to think about is the overall angle of your body, right? That's what we're keeping in a good spot. No problem, David. So Don S says, I have a fine adrenaline-based tremor. I have no problem with longer putts as momentum negates the problem. However, on short putts, increased pressure accentuates the tremor, and I never know which direction the putter face will be facing when I contact the ball. Any suggestions on how I might compensate for the problem? Sorry, Don. I honestly don't know. I'm not familiar with what an adrenaline-based tremor is, so I'm having trouble really knowing exactly what the problem is. All I can really say is, maybe having a heavier putter might help. I'm not really sure, to be honest. Um, I wish I knew something that would help, but I honestly don't know. All right, we got about 10 minutes left here. If we got any more questions. All right, we got about 5 minutes left. If anybody has any last minute questions. All right, so JG says to shallow out the club. I thought the goal is to have the club head below the elbow plane, but in earlier answer to a question, you talk about the hand path that should be below the elbow plane. Are the two one and the same? I suspect the club head follows the hands. So really the definition of shallowing out the club is the club head shallow to the hands. So the hands are going to work down the elbow plane line where the club head works just underneath the elbow plane line. That's basically what's happening there. So if it's above that elbow plane line, that's typically going to be steep, right? So we want to have the hands working kind of down toward the elbow plane line with the club shallower to that elbow plane line. So Willis says, should you release a little early to draw and a little later to fade? I mean, you can. I don't recommend trying to release the club earlier to draw the ball. What I would recommend doing is releasing the club, not too early, but then because if you release the club too early, you're going to add loft, and then you're also going to tend to hit the ball more thin. Maybe even some chunk shots, right? So we don't want to release the club too early generally. So what I'd recommend doing to draw the ball, the club face just needs to be close to the path of the club, right? Now releasing the club does get the club face more closed, but we don't want to release the club too early, right? So if we can release the club normally, release it 45 degrees out in front, and then just close the face by virtue of a stronger grip or stronger wrist angles, bowing the wrist, turning the face down like this, right? Those would be ways I'd be looking at to close the face. Easiest thing to do is just to take a stronger grip, right? So that's what I'd recommend doing. Now, releasing it a little bit later, kind of holding off the face a little bit. That's the way that I like to hit a fade because that allows you to have a little bit more shaft length. Because when you hit a fade, you're opening up the club face to the path. And when you open up the club face, you're going to tend to add loft, and it's going to be a weaker shot. That's why generally, if you just hit draws and fades by changing your grip, if you hit a fade by taking a weaker grip, that's why it's generally going to go higher and not quite as far. So what I like to do is I actually like to try to get more shaft lean with those fades, so that way the fades go just as far, and they're just as compressed. So that's kind of an advanced way to do it. But that's a way that you could do it with the fade, is actually releasing the club a little bit later, kind of holding off that face to keep the face open. But I don't recommend releasing the club earlier to hit a drop. But hey, if that works really well for you, then by all means do that. That's fine. But generally, there are typically better and easier ways to do it. All right, we're at noon right now, so thanks everybody for joining. We'll be back here tomorrow, Thursday, 3 p.m. Eastern time. Everybody have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you all next time.